We're doing a video interview of Bruce Buchanan, who is an American Legion member on the island. And I'll turn it over to Bruce and ask him a few questions. Basically, the first question is, what is your connection with Anderson Island? When and why did you come to the island?
To be around people like you, Ray, people who dedicate so much of their life experience to the activities of the island in very special ways. It's a place of peace and quiet, waving at people as they go by, calmness that I've just never seen before, and the level of volunteerism it's just a wonderful, pleasant surprise.
And what prompted you to join the military?
I had an ROTC commission about the time that they were thinking about the draft and the lottery, and I much rather would have preferred being my own person doing what I wanted to do. So I was actually in the Air Force ROTC, and when I went to do the physical exam, I had had a prior accident in childhood that affected my left thumb, and the Air Force, and they only found out about it because they asked about distinguishing marks or characteristics, and I was very happy to tell them about this special distinguishing mark. Well, that distinguishing mark washed me out of the Air Force. I had to go back and have a surgical procedure, and then a year later I went into Advanced Army ROTC, and then graduated 2 years later. When I was supposed to be at summer camp, I had a severe knee injury. I had a cartilage. I couldn't straighten my knee out. So I reported to camp with this huge duffel bag on my back, hardly being able to walk, but wanting to follow orders. And they said to me, well, you can't do this, go back. So I went to summer camp the next year and then received my commission at the end of the camp.
And where did you serve when you were on active duty?
Well, I actually served twice. When I graduated with my ROTC commission, I went to Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and I was a chemical corps officer at that time, getting my training at Anniston, Alabama. So then I went to Fort Bragg and was in a unit that supported the 82nd Airborne. Our job was to supply their flamethrowers and to give them chemical weapons, mostly for phosphorus grenades at that point, but we had training in chemical weapons and biologic to a certain extent, and nuclear weapons. We never were on active duty per se, although at the time that Khrushchev and Kennedy were arguing about nuclear weapons, within a year when I was in, we ended up going to the Tonopah test range to take down a number of markers that had varying degrees of radioactivity on them based on their distance from the primary weapon explosion. We did a practice run with TNT, 1,000 kiloton weapon. We ran around, did our dosimetry, came back, then being ready to go out again and do the next round, and the discussions were stopped. So we did not have anything to do out there except play for 3 weeks. So we would go into Las Vegas and gamble away and save silver dollars, which are now worth something. We also took advantage of the local area. My company commander, I was a second lieutenant at the time, he was a hellion, I guess that's what I can say. And he ended up getting a bunch of 95% pure grain alcohol, and he took it back to North Carolina in these containers that said radiation hazard, these 5-gallon drums, and sailed right through and had many parties as a result, none of which I fortunately attended. Then I was involved with the Cuban Missile Crisis, and our platoon was kept in our quarters for 2 weeks. We had ammunition issued, we had everything we needed, couldn't leave, slept in the barracks, went to a few briefings. I was the only company grade officer among all these majors and colonels and generals. I felt very important, but it was only because we would be following the 82nd Airborne in. We got intelligence briefings every day. However, they were not very accurate, and they had twice as many warheads as we thought and twice as many soldiers, and they were prepared to use tactical nuclear weapons on the beaches, which we didn't appreciate at all. And then after I spent, we also got alerted for President Kennedy's assassination. And finally, after that, I completed my 2 years and decided that I wanted to go to medical school. So I went back and took another year of pre-med and all the courses I didn't want to take the first time because I was having too much fun. So
What was your first degree in?
Biologic sciences education. I actually taught school a semester. Then I went back, took a year of pre-med and got all the nasty courses out of the way. One was comparative vertebrate anatomy. Each of us in the class had to carry around a cat, which was in formaldehyde, so we weren't popular on the campus with that. We had to know all the bones and structures, and so it was a semester class. Then I applied to medical school. I picked 6. University of Washington, because I was in-state. 5 others, all of which I went through every school in the country. There's a booklet for every medical school. I picked the 5 that had the highest percentage of out-of-state residents. I was turned down by 4. I was placed on the alternate list at Creighton. I hadn't heard from Marquette. So I was going to summer quarter, and they apparently were waiting for my summer quarter grades, which were good enough that they provided me at the very last minute a position to come to Marquette. By that time, I had signed a contract to teach school. So when I went to the principal, he said, well, I don't have the authority to release you. And I said, I understand that, I fully appreciate it, but if you could notify me in Milwaukee, that's where I'll be. So then we had 3 days to go to Milwaukee, and the third day was the day I started medical school. So there's 4 years of that, and then I did a really great internship at the University of Washington, straight medicine, on to my residency training, which at the U, they paid me $6,000 in 1969. So the next year, they were going to give me a large pay raise to $6,500. I said, no, that's not good enough. So I went to my family Army recruiter. He gave me $18,000 that year, a signing bonus. So I couldn't turn it down, and because of my prior time in the Army, they gave me credit for all my medical school, although they didn't pay for it at that time. So I was at the economic top of range for my rank, and it was a good living. So then I did a residence at Brooke Army Medical Center after going to Fort Sam Houston for basics, learning how to polish your shoes and show respect for others. And I'd already known it, and I had some pride at the time, but that people I worked with could have cared less. And I got my 2 years of training there in general medicine. Then I went to Fitzsimmons in Denver, outside of Denver, and got my fellowship training. And at the second year in my training, critical care had just come out. The Japanese had developed a bronchoscope that allowed the pixels at one end to marry up to the pixels at the other end for the very first time, so that you could see a fixed structure at the other end. Well, that led to finding cancers, cleaning out people that had obstructions in their airways, and a number of things that followed. But that year there was nobody who was trained. So another fellow and I trained each other, started doing them, and then we ended up training the staff members. I took a 2-year stint at Denver General Hospital because they had a lot more critical care activity than we did at Presidio or at the training hospital outside of Denver. So then I had to pay back the Army, so 2 years at Letterman. So I had really excellent tours in both Letterman now and the place in Denver, Fitzsimmons, are parks. They are no longer military bases. So after 2 years there, I tried to come up and set up a private practice in Tacoma. That was not to be that year. There was a lot of resistance for board-trained person to come up. There were a lot of old guard physicians who had 1 year of some kind of subspecialty, but none of them were boarded, and they were, I think, unaccepting of having somebody outside come in. So I ended up taking a year as the chief of pulmonary medicine at Madigan, where I had another great year, lots of fun. Then I got out, went to Tacoma General, was in charge of respiratory therapy, had a really good working ship with the critical care nurses there, and my practice just grew from that point forward. My first year I was by myself, and so I would work up to 18 hours a day with calls every night for 14 nights a week, every 2 weeks. And then I would get spelled for 1 weekend with another group. It was long, long first year. But then I added 2 military guys over the next 3 years, and the group gradually expanded, and life improved to some extent. But whenever you're doing critical care, you can get called out anytime in the middle of the night, and that there was sort of a bewitching hour. If you got called between 2 and 4 in the morning, it just completely destroyed your sleep schedule. Whereas if you got to sleep till 3, well, that was it for the night. But or you could come in at 1 and still get back to bed, but not in the middle of the night.
Did you have any memorable fellow service members, or some memorable occasions?
Oh,
interesting?
I had a really memorable experience. When I was at the Presidio, because of the helicopters that they had, they were able to pull out troops very quickly with serious injuries. They could patch them up over there, but they couldn't really do the definitive surgeries. And so they would bring them back to the Presidio, or to, the Presidio at San Francisco, and we would then patch them up, put them back together, and rehab them and care for them until they did get better. We also cared for the boat people that came over. Some of them were unbelievably grateful because I have a lady friend that I've known since who was a lab tech for the military in Saigon, and had she not gotten out, she would have been executed. She was on the last helicopter that lifted off from the roof of the embassy in Saigon, and she has never, ever forgotten that. She's volunteered at the VA for years, and now finally has a job, which she could have had many years earlier. And it was all because she was so grateful to the military for saving her life.
And while you were in the service, did you have a good family support while you did that, or did that help?
Actually, my first marriage, I was gone very much of the time when my 2 kids were growing up, and that was a really hard marriage. and I got divorced after being married for 26 years. I then went and did some serious counseling work and met my second wife, Sally, through that process, and after 5 years we were married, and I continued to be away from my kids at that point because they were grown, and I praise God now that I've had the opportunity to make up for lost time, so to speak, and I've become much closer to my kids, and I can smile when I think about all the fun things that we're doing. That's been a great relief to me. I must also say that the growth in my Christian faith since I've been on this island has been a wonderful benefit, has helped me pull my life really back together again, and recognize the importance of God's presence in my life.
That's great. That's all the questions I have. Do you have any more comments, Bruce? Or
Only that I feel honored to be included with this group. I never thought of myself as a war hero, because where I was during the Vietnam crisis was about as safe a place as one could be, and there were so many horrible stories about the people that were in the trenches and the front lines with information that just couldn't be any worse as far as I was concerned. So I felt that I was spared a very dangerous experience, and being a doctor and seeing these guys come out with post-traumatic stress disorder, which had been going on in every war with different names, it was wonderful to finally have a diagnosis that we could pin on these guys that would help them to understand their situation and help us to do better about their therapy. I saw a lot of people got very much better on treatment, and I've seen others who just lived in total darkness because they couldn't get beyond it.
well, I thank you for your support and of this program and for us to interview you. Thank you, Bruce.
Well, I want to thank you, Ray, for doing this. It's not an easy job, and your goal is a lofty one, and we will all be the beneficiaries of that. So thank you.